Hello, here's a story. Okay, so we've bought many of cars over the years on Craigslist. It has not been a big ordeal, except last time we bought a car on Craigslist. Okay, so we had a car that was $1,000, a $1,000 car that got in a wreck. Not a dangerous wreck, but a wreck. And that car got totaled by the insurance for the people who hit our car. That insurance paid $2,500. That's amazing. Okay, so that $2,500 needed to buy another car. We get on Craigslist for, the millionth time and find a guy who's selling a car. The listing is like, this car is amazing, right? It wasn't like that, but it was kind of like that. And he's like, what was he? He's like, this is the blue book value. This is how excellent condition it is. This is an amazing car. And it's like, all right, pal, calm down. Let's just meet up and find out what's going on. So Mark texts the guy and was like, reaffirming these statements. It's like, is there any issues with the car? He's like, oh no, this car is excellent. We should be reading the text message. We should screenshot the text messages. Okay, so he says the car is excellent. He just reiterates everything the Craigslist ad says. He is available the next day. So we drive in fucking rush hour traffic, like over an hour and balls heat, and meet up with the guy. So I'm standing outside of our car and his wife is standing outside of their truck or whatever they were driving, and Mark and the guy get in the car. They do a test drive. Mark comes back and essentially is like, okay, I'll buy it. So then we pay for the car and we drive off, and the car, within a handful of minutes of turning it on, the check engine light comes on. So we contact our mechanic and say, hey, something's up, what's going on? And he recommends that we get all the recalls checked before we bring it to him because he was so backed up at a shop. So we get the recalls checked and all is well, but the check engine light is still on. So we bring it to the shop and the mechanic looks at it and essentially is like, what's going on? Like, how many times did the car get turned on in front of you? He was like, was it turned off when you got there? And it was like, yeah. He was like, okay, so it was turned on once when you test drove it, and then the second time it was turned on was when you drove it home, which he knew point blank that was part of the scam, because that particular car has a 2-engine cycle. If you clear the codes, then you have to turn the car on twice in order for that check engine light to come on. So it wouldn't come on. That was the scam. The guy did it specifically so the check engine light wouldn't come on during the test drive, and he had the money. So we're sad, we're crying, our little black hearts are bleeding gold. And okay, so then we decide we need to sue him, even though we've never done it. We asked the internet how to do it. Yeah, the car is beyond repair. All sorts of stuff the mechanic saw was like, oh, this car is so bad. Okay, he dumped it on you. That was his direct quote. Sucker. Okay, so we look into, how do you sue? How do you do a
civil court?
Yeah, civil court. So first you need their address. Now the address on the title was old, so we had to get a private investigator. I asked some friends if they knew anyone personally, and I was recommended someone who was out of state. The out of state people, they had like 10 years experience, but they said there were limitations because they were out of state, and they were very clear that from the very beginning, they weren't sure if they'd be able to help us, and they wouldn't charge us until they, had a solid address for us. So after about 6 months of them kind of digging around, now these people had a very common name. Their last name is Jones. It's like they should have just been named like Brian Smith or some shit, So it took them like 6 months, and then they essentially stopped emailing. Like, it was like, okay, they're done. We didn't lose any money. We lost a lot of time, and we lost a shitload of morale. Okay. So then we contacted a private investigator in our area, and that cost $350, right? Yeah. Okay. $350. He gave us an address in like 2 seconds. It was like, we could have had this done a long time ago, but that's a shitload of money, which is fine. So he gives us an address. We drive, oh man, what was it? It was like 2 hours or something to go to the address and verify that they live there. So we get to this address and they definitely do not live there. So we contact the guy. The guy's offended. How dare you assume I would mislead you? I've done this for 25 years. He was like, look, all their information is pointing to this address. They don't want to be found. So I have other addresses. This isn't all for nothing, but, there's something sketchy about how the information links back to, their address and their info. Okay, so he gives us a new address and we drive, another hour and a half to this new address. And long story short, that, we confirm it.
Found him.
Yeah, we found him. So we file the paperwork, which I don't remember how much that was. I don't think it was a lot of money. Do you remember?
To serve them, it's like 70-something, 70-ish. I don't remember.
Okay, so at this point, we've paid $350 for a private investigator, maybe like $100 to file the paperwork, and then we've done excessive amounts of driving, like hours and hours and hours. This is ridiculous because in order to file the paperwork, you have to drive to their county, so that's like multiple trips. Okay, so we file finally about 6 months after the incident goes down, and we get a letter from their lawyer that says essentially they were trying to intimidate us, but it was fucking intimidating. So their letter from the lawyer essentially said, my client has done nothing wrong, and when we win in court, you will pay the lawyer fees. And that completely freaked us out because that was at the beginning of 2014. So we had just finished paying taxes for 2014. 2014, I think we made like $10,000 that whole year for total household income. I mean, we did not have any money to pay a lawyer if we lost in court, which was incredible because we were already out $2,500 for the car and we still needed a fucking car. So it was really intimidating seeing their letter. But we talked to the mechanic and he essentially said, we were indirectly saying maybe we shouldn't go to court because we've already lost enough money. And he essentially, our mechanic said, that's up to the judge to decide. Just because they say you're gonna have to pay us if we win, that's not up to them. That's up to the judge. So it's like, okay, that chilled us out. And when I saw the letter from their lawyer, I decided I would contact every legal aid service available because our income was so freaking low. Okay, so our court date was, I think it was 3 months out from when we first filed. And then the day of court, the court calls and says the trial has been postponed. I was paranoid. I was like, that's them and they're lying and they're trying to get us to like not show up. So we called the court and verified that for whatever reason, we had to postpone, we had to get a new court date. So then 3 months after that was the new court date. A week before going to court, SMU, which is like a really, really great law school, contacted us from 6 months ago when I wrote them and I said, help, I need help. And they wrote us, and I hadn't heard zero. I had not heard one thing back from them. And then 6 months after I contacted them, it was a week before the second court date, and they said, come in. They looked at our court case. They said, we can only, they saw that it was a strong case, that we had a strong case. They essentially said, we can't represent you in a week because there's just too much work for us to do on your case. So in 1 week, go to court. If you can get it postponed, we'll work with you. If you can't get it postponed, you have to just go represent yourself. So Mark drove 1,000,000 miles again to go to court, and he asked, can we postpone this? And the lady at the front was like, you need to call the lawyer and ask for permission. This is the day of court, people. We are like, this is like hours before they're supposed to be in front of the judge. So very stressful. Mark is a very quiet, shy person and was incredibly intimidated about going in front of their lawyer and a judge all on his own. So he calls the lawyer and leaves a message, and the lawyer calls back and he says, can we postpone the court date? And she says yes. And I thought I was gonna die. It's like, no way, dude. Why would she say yes? Oh my God, there's nothing in it for her to say yes other than just...
Well, I think she said she could use the time too,
well, true, but so if they would have gone to court that day, they maybe would have won just because of their representation. Like she had representation, you fucking representing yourself, not very good. So she said yes, so the court case gets postponed 3 months, right? But now we have law students and a lawyer. So So we sit down with them, we go through the story. Our mechanic is way too busy to come to court, so they, find a guy. Oh, it was a huge ordeal. So we're working with them for 3 months, and then our court date comes up. And then what happens? It gets postponed another time. So we're ready, and then what was the reason? It was the husband wasn't being served or something?
He's claimed that he hadn't been served, but I think at the time they were living together, but at some point they broke up and got divorced. So.
It was really tricky on what was going on their end. So for how many times is this? Is this the third time or the fourth time?
It was at least 4 times, I think. Total.
Okay, so it got postponed for the 4th time, or rescheduled. So this was the 4th scheduling. So we filed, so that was the first scheduling. They rescheduled the day of court. We rescheduled the day of court, and then there was this 4th time when
SMU needed time for they didn't get discovery requests.
That was another thing. So the power of having a law team is that they said we are going to change the petition. So the petition that we were filing was essentially saying we want our money back for the car. They were saying that there's a different bracket or a different.
It falls under a law where you can get damages.
Right, because it's under business. It's obviously we're not the fucking lawyers here. So with what they want to do is you can get up to 3 times the amount, with the maximum being $10,000. Okay, so they get a new petition, and then at this point the husband craps out and he's completely unavailable to go to court, right?
He just doesn't show up.
Okay, so then day of court, we end up getting 3
lawsuits
and a lawyer.
And
so we had 4 people. We had essentially 4 lawyers sitting in the front row. It was amazing. I was like, we thrive at being poor, or at least when we were poor, we were thriving at it. It was amazing. So there's the scammer on the right side with her single lawyer, and then there's our 4 lawyers, and then there's you sitting up front, and I'm just kind of I guess there. I'm a guest. So to my surprise, it took 2 hours of being in court in front of the judge, rehashing events. 2 hours. It was amazing. It was so thorough. Having lawyers was incredible. So their lawyer kept saying, what was their argument? It was that she never had contact with you. That the woman we were suing didn't have contact with you. So therefore she shouldn't be held liable. And the case essentially our lawyer was making is that even though she didn't sell it, she was physically there, but she
profited from the sale.
She didn't talk to you. She didn't have contact with you. But her name was on the
title.
Her name was on the title, so he was acting as her agent. Yes. So as her agent, whatever he did against the law was essentially her burden now at this point. So our lawyer, it was amazing. He kept doing this thing. So her lawyer would say these things like, Your Honor, my client hasn't even, she would just say all these things that sounded really good. Thank God we had lawyers there. And then our lawyer, he would do this thing. He was this gray-haired, old wise, doesn't give a fuck kind of guy, and he would just start shaking his head when she would talk. He would just quietly shake his head, and then he would look up and he would say, Your Honor, and then he would start quoting all these laws and explaining that what she's saying is completely irrelevant based on X, Y, and Z. So then at the end of 2 hours, our lawyers stood up and essentially were like, we have no reason to believe based on any evidence that the lady knowingly broke the law. It's that she's held accountable just because her name was on the title. It was just a complete formality that who knows if she knew. It's complicated. Okay, so we ended up winning, right? We won. It took 2 hours. And it was what was it? It was 14 months. So we bought the car in April 2015, and in June 2016, 14 months later, we finally got to court. It took forever. So if you ever want to sue someone, especially, a heads up. It takes a lot of time. It could take years, and it takes a lot of money. Because even if you don't have a lawyer, it takes a lot of money. So we had the first private investigator. We had all the gas and all the time of driving back and forth to kind of fill out paperwork, meet up with the the lawyer, verify where people live, find out they don't live certain places. It was so many times we drove to the courthouse. It was a huge drain, like financially, time, mentally. So just know that there's, a long road ahead. And then after we won, we had to file more paperwork, which we had to get some more information that we didn't need when we filed initially. So we had to hire a second private investigator. We found a cheaper one for, what was it, $150? Or was it $250?
I think it was only 150.
So we got a second one, and then we filed everything and drove around more to do that. And I mean, that's that. Did we get the money? No, not yet. I mean, they have up to 10 years to pay. I
think you can also renew it after 10 years.
Yeah, there's no guarantee you're gonna get paid. There's incentives for them to pay. There's interest on what they owe us.
Yeah, it gets interest.
I don't know if it's compound interest or if it's just interest on the total, because if it is compound interest, after 10 years, if they don't pay, like at the very end of 10 years, it would almost double just by compounding. Again, I don't know if it compounds. Okay, so they have incentives to pay. I think there's other things like they couldn't buy a house.
Yeah.
If they have the, if they have this like...
If they sell any property they own in that county, we get paid.
So there's a lot of things that could give reason for us to get paid, but I mean, everything I've ever read about when you sue someone, especially in the people's court, is that even if you win, it's really up in the air if you're ever going to get paid. So long story short, we won. Took a lot of time, a lot of money, 14 months. Dude, if we would have known, a lot of stress. I mean, every time we thought we were going to court, that was very nerve-wracking. And then it would get postponed, and that was nerve-wracking. It was like right on the cusp of like, are we getting a lawyer? Are we not? It was like every moment was so dramatic. It was like a movie every time. But we won, and nothing has changed in our life. I mean, as far as we still have a broken down car that we never drove. We drove for like 3 days or something like that. Bought it, drove it, parked it, left it for the last since spring of 2015, and it's still there. It's still sitting there untouched. So I encourage you to sue and to have all your information written out, and try to look up everything that's needed in your area. Get legal aid if needed. And good luck. Peace.